Thank you. Just get up on the stage. It's not my natural habitat being up here, but here I am. So you might be wondering who this Kiwi chick is, coming to talk to you today about integral health. So I'm a Kiwi. I'm based in the Canterbury Plains in South Island of New Zealand. And really privileged to be over here today to talk to you all about some of the stuff I've been working on with Lincoln University. So a little bit about me. I don't like being in front of the camera. I went looking for photos and this was all I could find, which is a little bit formal. So I've been able to work in several different disciplines within agriculture in a research capacity over the last sort of 8 years, and really sort of getting into detail about a lot of the stuff that's already been talked about by Dan and a few other people about what it is that connects our soils to our livestock, to our consumers and our ecosystems, and developing some methods to actually start to help unravel that and provide some physical evidence of some of the stuff that we already know, that actually we are what we eats. Been able to work with beef cattle, mixed systems, including some wapiti deer. I've also worked in red deer finishing systems, dairy cows, so I've been dairy farming since 2016. And my husband, who's actually just in the corner over there, and our daughter, who's passed out just outside of the tent. Some of you might have seen her. Really blessed to be able to have them over here with me today, and talking about our wonderful life and all the great things that we've been able to do. And also, I'm going to be moving through this presentation really quite quickly. Originally, this was like a 3-hour description of the integral health farm, and so there's a lot of moving parts within this farm and the processes that we use to design it. So I'm really going to be relying on you all to pay attention and ask questions at the end. But if there's something that you're really not following, if I'm not making sense, please just stick your hand up and ask the question. I'm happy to do that as we go. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. It's a story you all know. It's a story that's been repeated a couple of times here the last couple of days. We need to find ways of reconciling our market, food security, and planetary boundaries. And this is a problem that's not just for farmers, it's a problem for everyone. So we know that global population is likely, projected to grow and until about 10.1 billion based on the United Nations projections, and that will occur at the end of 2080. That's still a wee while away. So we're probably things are probably gonna get a little bit worse before they get better. And that creates a huge risk in terms of things like food security and resource security. So fresh water and all of that is going to become more important. On the other side of the scale, and particularly in New Zealand, we don't have any subsidies. So anything we do in our farm practices that has to be market-led means that people actually have to be willing to pay more for something in order to give farmers security to actually make a change that is changing the economic outcomes of their farm system. So what we do does need to be economically just. It's just no way of getting around that. And we just don't have the capital in New Zealand to be able to support any sort of subsidisation as well. So we need the other issue is that while market is becoming more regulated in terms of issues around climate change and carbon, that's actually only one part of the story. And when we look at our planetary boundaries, of which there are 9 other things, so climate is just one, there's 6 of them that we've already exceeded the Holocene levels. So that indicates that we're in a state of unprecedented, really like change that we just can't really predict. So not only are we going to be limited for food, our ability to grow food, is also going to be more limited. And so, yeah, that's a potentially a really difficult narrative or challenge, I guess. And like I say, that's not something just for farmers to solve. That's something that we as a society need to come together to actually address. The other thing I'd just like to point out in biodiversity is something that's come up again and again. It's actually a crucial part of about three or four of these different planetary boundaries. And actually some people are predicting that the change in or reduction of biodiversity will create an impact that will rival climate change and carbon. So it's a really big problem that sometimes doesn't get the attention that it deserves, because it's really important as part of our ecosystems that we have biodiversity in order to continue to function and create food webs that then also flow to our food supplies. So we need to find a way of getting consumers and society to buy into this concept of agriculture and food security. That can be really hard to do, but what I've found throughout my research is that health is a concept that is universal. So regardless of the language that you speak, the idea of health is something that is really, really powerful. And so several research papers have sort of identified that there is like quite a big market opportunity in recognising health. The other thing that I would argue is that health doesn't just refer to human beings and our own well-being, and it doesn't just refer to the health of our livestock, but it's a multidisciplinary term that can refer to anything. Our soils, our plants, our ecosystems. So I think tying together those two concepts is really important and has the potential to create a really powerful story. And this is where we sort of came to designing the integral health dairy farm. So just to give a bit of context, at Ashley Dean is a university dairy farm. It's been owned by the university for over 150 years. So based in Christchurch in South Island, New Zealand. So you'll see if you look at Tasmania on the map, we're actually at a very similar latitude, relatively similar climate, probably a little bit cooler and drier, less humid over there. But in terms of rainfall, we get about 600 mils per year, so probably a little bit more than Australia in some parts. But very dry, stony soils, which are quite common across the Canterbury Plains. So that's quite a challenging environment to have a dairy farm, and some of you might be rightly asking, why do you have dairy cows there? And it's a great question, but it's also a great opportunity to explore future strategies for how we're going to be able to mitigate climate change and poor soil structure, stony soils and drought conditions, and create a dairy system that can function within those restrictions. So this is a project too. I just have to give a quick plug to all of our sponsors. In New Zealand, we don't get a lot of funding opportunities, and so ideas like this are really hard to get off the ground, but we are very fortunate to be funded not only through Lincoln University and the Centre of Excellence with Lincoln University, but also about 30 other industry sponsors. A really interesting feature about some of these sponsors is that they're actually competitors. So we've got the likes of Fonterra, which is our main supplier, but we've also got the likes of Synlait, A2, Westland, Oceania Dairies. Pretty much all but one of our milk processors have actually been able to support this project. So it's a really great collaborative approach to getting industry to come together to support this research. And of course, this idea is not something that is just my own. This is a massive project that's supported through a multidisciplinary team. Primarily, it's led through Pablo Gregorini and Professor Ian Gordon. So they are mentors of mine. I've had the privilege of working with Pablo for about 8 years now. He was also my PhD supervisor. And yeah, so I'm really, really grateful to have had this opportunity. In terms of the implementation team, I'm the research manager, so I've been involved in this project since day one in terms of designing it and trying to keep Pablo a little bit in line with some of his big ideas, and that's a relationship that has really, really grown us both in being able to challenge each other. So yeah, I've been responsible for not only the design process of some of the things I'll be talking about, but also actually getting it off the ground, getting it to work and function as a like self-sustainable dairy system. And then we're also really lucky to have other people on the immediate implementation team, including our research technician, Bella, our lovely landscape architecturist, Anna, who is responsible for designing all the planting stuff that I'll be talking about, and a couple of other people, Stuart, who's involved in the digital components of the project, and Shannon, who comes from the perspective of the nearby community. So this is a peri-urban farm that's literally about 5 minutes away from the nearest town, which is Rolleston. So we got asked to create something new for Ashley Dean. We back in 2020, we got this thing called Mycoplasma bovis, which is quite new to New Zealand. And the idea was that we were going to try to eradicate it. So we actually had to destock all of our animals, including all of our research animals, which are really expensive and hard to replace. So after that, the Vice-Chancellor grant came to Pablo and I and asked us to think of something new. Not a lot was going on at Ashley Dean at that time. And so we sort of like, well, we need to actually do something a little bit different there than the conventional research of studying things like plantain and fertiliser use. So he asked us to build something that was a bit more holistic, and so we sat down and thought of, well, how do we actually go about doing that? I'm a ruminant nutritionist. That's what my PhD was based in farm systems, and so is Pablo. But a farm has many biological levels, and so we wanted to bring in experts to really debate about what the idealistic dairy farm would look like, or a dairy farm of the future. So we did that democratically. So we essentially held a whole lot of workshops with different international experts on different soil scientists, but also rural professionals and farmers and different people across the supply chain to sort of nut it all out. And we considered each level of the farm equally. So the soil was considered equal to the animals. The animals were considered equal to the farm workers. The university requirements were considered equal to a worm, essentially. Although I don't know that the Vice-Chancellor would like me saying that. But yeah, so we then had to try and find a way, and part of my role as the research manager was to pull all of those brilliant ideas and actually create a tangible farm system. And so, yeah, the process we followed was we gathered some data, we did some really in-depth soil surveys and mapping, GIS modelling. We went round and round in terms of what the basic concepts of this system would involve. And then we prototyped. So we found a few key things that we wanted to really implement and focused on how we could actually make that a reality. And yeah, now we're in this process of sort of iterative implementation. So the idea is that the framework that we've set is not set in stone. It's something that will continue to evolve, and it's a long-term project. We've planted trees. So yeah, we've got a 5-year implementation period that has been brought back down to 3. And so yeah, the plan is to just continually evolve some of these ideas as we need to. So the basic blue. Okay, sorry about that. Just typical of me, just find a way to disrupt things. So the guiding principles consist of nutraceuticals. So I talked a little bit yesterday about this idea that we are what we eats, and Dan sort of was talking a little bit about this earlier, and we've been doing some metabolic work as well, proving actually what we graze and how we graze it has a direct influence on human consumer metabolism. And there is a need to incorporate plant secondary metabolites and think about our nutrition from a more holistic level. That's not just focused on the primary components, so carbohydrates, fats, and lipids, and that sort of thing. So we really wanted to include that research within this project as a way of systemising and taking that component work to the next step. The next bit was hedonics and eudaimonics for positive animal emotions. So sorry. Brilliant. Okay, yeah, hopefully that's okay. All right, so hedonics and eudaimonics. So moving away from this idea of animals need to be free of negative emotions, but actually have the capacity to experience positive things. And so I'll go through some of the things that we've been doing to rectify that. Phased reduction of cows and replacement of synthetics. We weren't constraining this project in being like organic or regenerative or any of those labels, because we wanted it to be flexible and holistic. But recognizing the landscape of Ashley Dean being really stony soils, limited water supply as well, even though it's irrigated. So we needed to think more carefully about what the natural capacity or not natural capital of the landscape actually was, and create a system that meets what is actually available. Pharmacognosy and pharmacology. So, going back towards the plant secondary metabolites, creating farming practices that actually think more about the ecology of the system as opposed to just one unidimensional output, which is milk. Holobiont for design, so incorporating components of microbiome and investigating how that flows through to our food systems. Animals as sentient beings, not machines. Again, we're really good at thinking about our animals as a herd or a mob, but actually that mob is comprised of many individuals. So finding ways to graze animals on an individual level was something we're really keen to look further into. And reverse sensitivity conscious. So that relates to the idea that this farm is peri-urban. Not only do we want to create a place that farmers can come and learn new things and get new ideas, but we want to create a place that locals can also come in just general society and learn about farming practices, and also teach us as farmers about what society needs, and try and actually have more of a two-way response rather than just one. So this is just a basic map of the farm. So it's a 40 hectare total block, and we have about 100 dairy cows. So the section to the left is our main milking platform. So that's under pivot irrigation, so you can sort of see the lines indicating where the pivot runs. And then got the milking shed in the central part there, and behind we've got our wintering system. So a big part of what we've been trying to do is moving away from the monoculture crop, high intensive grazing wintering system, and actually towards something that's a little bit more diverse in terms of its nutritional profile, which is important for ruminant requirements, but also that better meets environmental standards. So we're also quite lucky on this farm. We have quite a bit of infrastructure that currently goes unused. So there's really massive effluent system and feed pads and standoff pads, but currently they're actually just not, they're being underutilised. So for us, it was how can we actually utilise that infrastructure to create a system that's actually better for everyone. Some of the things, the system components are like this is how we're going to tackle the the ideas that I was just discussing. So adjacent swards. Yesterday I talked a little bit about functional diversity, which is providing diversity in adjacent pastures. And the purpose of doing it that way rather than as a mixed sward is to enable an environment where different plant species can thrive. We have a really heavy reliance on perennial ryegrass in New Zealand, and probably similar here a little bit. But the problem with perennial ryegrass is it's really competitive, which means it outcompetes a lot of other species. So the idea of adjacent swards gives us the capacity to actually grow different plants that would not normally thrive in the presence of perennial ryegrass. And one example of that is tall fescue, which we've been able to establish tall fescue and meadow fescue swards that also have legumes, herbs, annual clovers, that provides a more diverse diet. The other benefit of adjacent swards is that from a foraging ecology perspective, it gives the animals the ability to identify a discrete area of the paddock, go towards it and graze that area based on their own negative feedback and their physiological needs. So Fred Provenza coined this term, which is called nutritional wisdom. Some of you might have heard of it. And that being that ruminants actually are able to make their own decisions about what they need to eat and when. But when we break feed them behind a fence on a pasture that's quite uniform, they've got no capacity to make any decisions about it because it's all the same. So if we create different areas in a paddock that they can visually see, they know that, once they're sort of adapted to it, they know that this particular pasture is going to give them the protein or the plant secondary metabolites that they need based on their own individual needs, then actually we're meeting a lot of our targets for not only improving animal welfare and creating positive emotions, but we're also meeting some environmental targets, because what we've found is when you enable that, animals don't overindulge, or it's called incidental augmentation is the technical term. They don't overindulge in things they don't need to, like protein. So we've seen 20 to 30% reductions in milk urea nitrogen, which is a proxy for urea nitrogen as well. That would indicate that there's actually an environmental advantage to grazing these pastures in this way. And just to touch a little bit on what the work I've been doing with metabolomics and in a similar design to what Dan was talking about earlier, we've also run human trials feeding beef that have been finished in this way and shown that there is an advantage to things such as vitamin E content. So we're seeing a direct relationship between that grazing method and human metabolism. And there are several hundred other things that we've identified that we just don't know. So I think that just highlights the complexity of our nutrition and, the need to actually think about things like we don't know a lot. There's still heaps to learn in that space. So yeah, really exciting. But anyway, moving on. The other component that we've been looking at is integrating trees. So with the development of irrigation across the Canterbury Plains, we've seen a massive reduction in trees, and if any of you have been there recently, you'll notice that it's just quite like a barren, almost landscape. So that's a problem for animal welfare because there's no shade or shelter. But it's also a bit of a travesty for our underground life and ability to hold water in the soil. So it's a great opportunity for us to think about how can we integrate trees back under irrigation to actually create soils that are more resilient in the future, among several other things. Fetal nutrition for emotional design. Did you know that if you feed a pregnant animal, whether it's a sheep or a cow, if you give her, dose her with certain plants while she's pregnant, that fetus or offspring will then be more likely to eat those plants when it's born. We didn't know that either until a couple of years ago, but really interesting research showing that actually what we feed to livestock when they're gestating influences their ability to try new things. So it's this thing called neophobia, where we're scared to do something new. And yeah, some of you probably have noticed that heifers or young livestock will be more hesitant to try new things. But yeah, if we can actually expose them to things in utero, then we can reduce that neophobic experience, and that's a positive outcome. The idea of moolus for toilets and beds. So I'm pretty sure that term moolo might be trademarked, so I have to be a bit careful about using that one. But so going back to the idea of trees, we can actually make those sites multifunctional. So we know that the animals will be hanging around and getting shelter and having a bit of a scratch and a browse. So for us, it's an opportunity to set up an area that can help capture some of the effluent. And the idea being that we've laid down some chip, some pine, but also poplar, which has been shown to be really nitrate absorbent. And that slows down the nitrate patches, so it slows it down, so it will still go through the soil profile, but because it's slowing it down, it's giving it time for the trees, the roots, and also the nearby pastures to actually absorb that nitrogen. So that's something that we're developing. It's definitely sort of a prototype in its development phase, but really interesting nonetheless. We're looking at how we can integrate a motel or a you see lots of these really cool terms popping up, or a shed on our standoff pad. That's not something that I'm saying that all farmers need to do, but like I said, utilising the existing infrastructure that's already on this farm. To us, it's a good opportunity to create a sheltered area that we can put our cows not only in winter, but also in summer as a place that's cool and ventilated. And we're doing some work to look at how we can capture methane and stuff from that facility as well. So it's everything I'm talking about is just, it's got to be multifunctional. And so yeah, we've put a lot of thought into how we can get the most out of everything that we do. So another cool thing that we're doing is green artificial intelligence. We are one of the farms, I think, in New Zealand that is constantly monitoring our carbon flux in real time. And we're doing that through a eddy covariate tower that's plugged in all of our farm, and that looks as a probe. Yeah, and that has a probe that's measuring CO2 flux in the ground. That is correlated to the satellite imagery across the platform, and so we can use those two technologies through AI to evaluate what the CO2 flux is across the farm system. So just to give you a little visualization, this is the idea of what it will look like in probably about 20 years' time, when our trees have grown a bit more. So you can see this concept of adjacent swards. In the paddock we've got 3 different types of pastures. So one being a more medicinal, potent forage, which at the moment is chicory and crimson clover. The middle component being a perennial ryegrass-based pasture, recognising that gives us our cool season functionality, but there'll be bits of plantain and chicory and other plant species also incorporated there as well. And then on the left, we've got our tall fescue diverse pasture. And so at any one time, we'll break fence each of these. And so cows can have access to all 3 pastures at once and make decisions about what it is that they want to graze and when they want to graze it. And so we've been doing this, the implementation of this project started 3 years ago. So we've been essentially running these pastures for the last 2 full complete seasons, and our 3rd currently. And yeah, so this is just some of the tech and things that we're incorporating. You'll see here is a sort of a diagram showing our browsing sites. So these are the tree areas. So trees provide not only somewhere to shelter, they're also been thought of in terms of their biochemical profiles. So we've designed them to include like a range of polyphenolics, which are anti-inflammatories, antibiotics, all sorts of good things, heart healthy And like I said, that's sort of been supported by some of the research that we've been doing at a component trial level. The other thing to note there is that they're not just comprised of native species. So we've gone for a mixed ecology approach, being that some shrubs and trees provide things that that are really useful on different levels. So we've got legumes which consist of Tagesaste or tree lucerne that are also, they have tannins which are anti-methanogenic. But also, they're a legume, so they fix nitrogen. So it's just identifying the right place, the right plant for the right place. And we've got three elements of these shrubs. So we've got something that's like a shade tree that will be coppiced below a 2 metre height restriction of the pivot irrigator. But below that, we've also got flaxes and shrubby things that help to fill in the gaps and provide wind shelter. And then on the ground we have aromatic species, so herbs and flowers and things like that. And because some of the stuff that I've come across is actually some like plant secondary metabolites don't just need to be eaten or ingested; they can actually also be inhaled. So there's research in France showing that cows exposed to yarrow, which some of you might recognise as a weed, supposedly, contains potent sesquiterpenoids, which are really potent antioxidants. And actually they found that they were coming up in the bloodstream of cows that were exposed to yarrow within about 30 seconds. So that's not being eaten, that's going through your pulmonary system. So we've tried to incorporate as much flowers and wildflowers, which attracts biodiversity and that sort of thing, as well as thinking of it from a medicinal sort of point of view. And, on a side note, we've also incorporated a lot of things like rosemary and thyme and mint, so it's the perfect place to go on a Sunday evening if you're looking to get some herbs for the Sunday roast. So it's all multifunctional. Some of the research I've been working in, milk nutraceuticals and metabolomics, which was grazing cows on functional diverse diets and looking at the milk profiles and seeing some really curious things coming through, like changes in deoxycarnitine, which is associated with lipid metabolism. And so another element of that is sort of related to this pathway of trimethylamine N oxide, which together starting to provide evidence that actually animals on a pasture-based diet have lipid metabolism that's quite different to those that are grazed on a monotonous or even a grain-based diet. And we've seen similarities with our research to the likes of Stefan van Vliet, who's over in Utah State, that Dan's also working a little bit with. So it's sort of like comparing a couch potato, so an obese animal that sits on a couch all day and doesn't do a lot, and eating that versus eating an athlete. So we think that there is actually a lot to be said about the types of fat that we're eating, and there's actually more. The story goes beyond just the omega-3 and omega-6 story. There's a lot more going on in that space. So that's something we're looking at the moment. Going back to the tuna, I call them tuna, that's in Te Reo Māori, that is what we call an eel. So we have this concept in New Zealand that Māori call kaitiakitanga, which is where guardians of the land, and that's a common theme that I've heard a couple of times today. So we have designed the browsing sites to be shaped like a tuna, and that's not just to tell a really cool story. They are actually overlaid on top of our waterways, so they are filtering our water systems, and that was something that we designed using like the detailed soil mapping, so looking at where the underground water channels actually were. So we've oriented those sites to actually help filter those water systems. Eels are considered as guardians of the waterways, so we thought that was quite an appropriate term for our browsing sites. it's also, the shape is rooted in foraging ecology. So the idea being that each one of these like indents is a place where a cow, it's the same width as her like feeding station. And so she can actually within one place have access to a variety of different things. In reality, when it comes to fencing something like this, I'm sure some of you can appreciate that's quite expensive. So we've actually scaled that idea back. It's now more of a gentle S shape, I would describe it. So it still has the curvature, which provides us with a little bit more surface area for wind shelter and things like that, so that each cow can have a bit more access. But yeah, it's just a little bit more affordable. So this is the initial planting on the left. Yeah, the left. That's day 0. That was planted in 2023. And in the middle is sort of about 12 months later. So you can see a cow having a good scratch on one of our scratching posts that's also there. And then this is Anna and I in this browsing site not that long ago. And you can see that already that there's quite a drastic change in terms of the flowers and that sort of thing. And yeah, so it's quite a cool thing to be able to watch it progress. And definitely keen to see what happens, in the next sort of 18 months. The other thing I'll point out is all of this is fenced. So we designed these browsing sites or tuna so that cows could come in and browse over the fence. But, they can't just walk all the way through and scratch and that sort of thing. So there are areas that will be that won't be browsed, that will be kept away from livestock, so that gives us the opportunity to look at, from an ecological perspective, changes in biodiversity and how different microclimates can be microenvironments can be created within a relatively small area. And yeah, we've seen some cool things in biodiversity. Some are better than others. This middle caterpillar is called a woolly bugger. I can't remember what the Latin name is, but I do remember the common name. That's actually a native caterpillar in New Zealand, and it's a natural predator of ragwort, which is a toxic weed. So yeah, pretty cool to see that around. This caterpillar here is more native to you guys than it is to us. You can see it grazing on a eucalypt. Pretty cool looking bug, but actually that was starting to decimate that tree a little bit, so we kindly donated it and its friends to a local daycare. So no caterpillars were harmed, but it's not particularly it's not native to us. It's not exactly a pest either, but yeah, just interesting to start seeing some of these things pop up. Part of what we're doing within the system is how can we digitalise agriculture. There's been an overwhelm of information and technology come into our industry, but farmers are just not equipped to be able to deal with all that information and put it in a way that can actually streamline some of the decision making. So part of what we're doing is how do we bring all of that stuff together, and that's something that Associate Professor Stuart Charters has been involved with. So creating a framework that incorporates all of the data streams and getting APIs and things like that, so that it's all automated and we can use AI to actually help with some of the decision making. Thought might be interesting to show carbon flux. So this is CO2 flux from our Eddy covariate tower between 2023 and 2024. The calendar year. So really interesting observation that when we're in periods of drought, as some of you might know, we tend to emit more carbon versus we're actually sequestering it in periods of higher rainfall. So that's a really cool observation to have. There's not really any hard data in New Zealand from a pasture-based system. So yeah, really powerful tool. And just going into some of the nitty-gritty data from the last season, it was a bit of a mixed bag because we did have a bit of a drought. But what we were able to do is we were able to drop our synthetic nitrogen to just about half of what we were doing conventionally and what was done on the farm before we started. Even though we dropped our synthetic nitrogen use by half, that didn't mean we grew half as much pasture. We did have a reduction of about 18%, but that was also driven by implementation of our tunas, which are 4% of the milking platform. So that reduced our pasture growth as well, and a few other things that were actually more involved with the grazing management due to lack of subdivision and sort of things that are associated with the actual setup of the project, as opposed to other issues. We found we're able to maintain milk production even though we actually had to cut off our lactation earlier. So we dried our cows off about 20 days before the main mob, and the decision of that was that we're running out of grass. Like everyone was, we're in a drought. We ran out of water for our irrigators. Things get pretty dry pretty quickly at Ashley Dean, so that was a decision we made to preserve animal body conditions so that our winter period was a bit smoother. And we've really benefited from that this season in terms of our cows are producing really, really well relative to the main herd. The other thing is, so we're able to also reduce our milk urea nitrogen by, I believe it was about 18%. That's likely a factor. We're also bred for low milk urea nitrogen cows, so cows that actually don't excrete as much urea. So combination of functional diversity and also like breeding are probably a consequence of that. No, so we're a pasture-based system. The inputs that we bring in is silage. So there was silage brought in. It's probably about 30% of the total diet, which is a bit higher based on the lack of pasture growth and drought conditions and things like that. That was definitely. But no, we don't have in-shed feeding or any infrastructure to be able to do that other than the feed pad. So that's something that we avoid. What have we learned? I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to wrap up really quickly. You can actually grow trees on the Canterbury Plains under irrigation. So hoping that that's something that actually starts to take off a little bit, because it's just such a powerful tool for animal welfare, water holding capacity of our soils, shelter, all of that sort of stuff. 57% reduction in synthetic nitrogen does not correlate to the same reduction in pasture growth, which means, do we need to be applying as much synthetic nitrogen? Probably not. And we're able to increase animal efficiency with this system. So from a production outcome, it's actually really, really powerful, that we can actually do better for the environment and also get similar productions. So what do we still know? Probably heaps. I think this graph is just such a powerful tool, because there's what we think we don't know, but then there's also what we actually just don't even know that we don't know. So the journey is never ending. The point of this project is to continue to learn and continue to evolve with the knowledge as we obtain it. And so, I can tell you some of the things that we're looking to do, which is change our grazing management to meet our functional diverse pastures, which is more focused around soil carbon and that sort of thing. Tweak the use of synthetic nitrogen, so continue to, as a phased transitional reduction. And we're actually doing that through the use of fertigation, which is something that's been incorporated this season. And combine our data systems. That's just such a complex beast, but it's so necessary to reduce and streamline our farming practices, and continue to increase the resiliency of the system. So those are just some of the main things that we're looking to do. If you want to hear more, you can always contact me by email or through LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive, but thank you so much for your time today. I'd just like to finish just by saying, today has been such a privilege, today and yesterday such a privilege to be talking amongst some really great people doing some amazing things, and talking to you all as well. And I've heard some really fantastic stories and commonalities, and I really feel that, you know, we've all got an amazing wealth of experience and knowledge, but the call to action is really actually what do we do with all this information, and it's up to us as a community of people to go out and take this information into the world and actually make some of these ideas a little bit more mainstream, because that's where the change and transformation will happen. So thank you so much for being here and for listening to me today.
I think you all agree, like, that was absolutely fascinating stuff, Anita, and sincere apologies for the mic breakdown, but life goes on. And we've got time for a couple of quick questions. My comment is really just like, thank you for the work that you are doing in that area, because it's so important to be able to have the backup, to be able to say why these methods work and the scientific reasoning behind that. Who knew that cows like to be happy? Yeah. Like, and how we can make our animals happy is actually part of our production systems. So does anyone have any questions off the back?
So you have your tuna, you have the pivots going quite neatly. Have you thought about how you can manage the height of those?
So the question is, the pivots are coming very close to the tuna breaks, and how are you going to manage that when the trees grow to a certain height that are going to impact that pivot?
Yeah, great question. It's something we spend a lot of time brainstorming how do we get around that problem. So the plants that we've selected that are the sheltered type sort of trees are able to be coppiced, which means that we can train them to grow outwards as opposed to up. So we'll be trimming them to at certain times of the year to encourage that growth outwards, which will also give us more shelter and shade and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, it's not a perfect. It's certainly going to be a learning experience. But that was the thinking, and that's why we've selected certain plants to go in those middle sections.
Thank you. Yes. This morning, do you want to just
Am I the first person to stand up to ask the question? This morning, Dan Kitteridge was talking about the only predictor of increased vitality or health in the food was what's happening in the soil. And I'm sure you are monitoring that, but can you give us a little brief overview of what's happening in the soil?
Yeah, great question. The question was, what are we doing? Oh, you've already asked. Sorry, I just forgot that you actually asked that into the microphone. It's been a really long day. So we're doing so many things in the soil, and there's different elements in that we're looking at what's happening in the soil in our pastures, which are being grazed, but then we're also looking at what's happening in the soil in our tunas that are not, being grazed. So we've working with a company called Fertiliser New Zealand with John Barnes, who is a philanthropist who's sponsoring some of the team at Lincoln University, and he's developed a program to incorporate biological stimulants within our system so that we can actually improve the biological sort of functioning of our soils. And so that's something we're also working with Gwen Grillet from Manaki Whenua Landcare Research in New Zealand, and she is a renowned soil scientist looking at the biology of our soil. So that's it's about as detailed as I can give as a ruminant nutritionist. It's not my field of expertise, and she would do a much better job at answering your question. But yeah, lots going on. We do visual soil assessments regularly, as well as actually monitoring 4 times a season what is going on in terms of our biology, our physical structure, as well as our chemical elements. So yeah, it's really, really something that we're targeting.
I'm sincerely, again, apologise for cutting you short, because I know that there's probably loads of people with questions, but if you would like to follow Anita outside or ask her some questions here, please do. And yeah, thank you so much, Anita. It's been a pleasure listening to you and hearing about your work. Very admirable. Thank you.